Beware of spoilers, Tarnished. I see why Elden Ring won Game of the Year. Firstly, I've only beaten the game once. However, with a game as long as Elden Ring, I really feel like that's still enough to form an opinion about the game that is justified. Oh my goodness, this game is awesome. Now, my build, if you were curious, I was using the Great Sword, and I was doing a strength-focused build, although I will say, according to others, I was a little sloppy with my point allocation, because by the time I reached the Fire Giant, I hadn't even gotten 60 Vigor, and I had kind of spread my stuff around, but because of that, I wasn't really doing the one thing you do with the strength build, which is focusing on strength, endurance, and vitality. Regardless, I still think that I have genuine criticisms and compliments for the game, and they are just as valid as someone who's beaten it 100 times. Difficulty. This is a FromSoft game. It's one of those games. It's a medieval or melee-focused combat game that takes place in, not the modern day, that is very punishing, and it's like Dark Souls. Elden Ring just feels natural. That idea of I can't beat a boss, let me go grind, is transformed into I can't beat a boss, let me go explore the world. And yes, I'll do some grinding in that process, but it's not let me fight an enemy right outside his area. It's let me go fight a slightly weaker boss. Let me try something just a level below the thing I can't beat until I'm ready. And that kind of freedom is amazing for this kind of game. That said, is this game still punishing? Yes. However, I'd say it's more challenging than it is punishing. There are bosses that I've hated, and the second I beat them, I'm like, this is the best game I've ever played. With some exceptions. I'm looking at you, Fire Giant. But the game has a very great sense of completion. It is a finished product. It is generous that they're even making a DLC, because the game is so whole and vast on its own, you don't need a DLC. Although I'm so excited we get one. It's not Fallout 4 where you needed Far Harbor to really bring it up. That was a great DLC, but Elden Ring is just great on its own. So those are just the very quick, good thoughts I have on the game, and here's what I could have criticized. These are the very quick parts. There's some issues with the third-person camera. It's a very tricky deal. Elden Ring has a lock-on system. There are going to be problems. When fighting dragons, you need to learn really quickly that when they're doing the overhead attack and you're locked on, you need to run one way, and then as soon as they pass overhead and the camera turns around, you need to run the opposite way. Sometimes you'll get near a wall and then you can't see anything but your shoulders. That's really my biggest complaint. They're just some bosses that are just hard, but again, when you beat them, you feel great. But my big complaint will be the Fire Giant, and I'll go into that later, but that's just the quick of it. Now, I won't actually be talking about the story, because the joy of the story is learning it yourself. There are channels if you need help, but you will primarily be piecing together this world to your own understanding by reading item descriptions, using environmental storytelling. It's not going to be something that is very often hand-fed to you, rather drip-fed with things that you have to go out and seek. If you don't look that deep in the story, it really is just you becoming the God King of the lands between by becoming Elden Lord, and you have to kill the people who are in your way. But it's so much more than that. And I'm not going to really go into it because I want you to discover it yourself. Now, overall, there's a lot of replayability. You can make so many different builds, so many different weapons, so many different skill sets, Ashes of War. I would be here for at least 10 minutes just explaining each thing if I really went into the nuance, and I'm not gonna, because that's too much just for one segment of the video. It is a great game in that regard. You can approach it so many different ways. There's invasions and summons. You can help other players if you're ever bored. There's always something to do, and I really appreciate that. The bosses are fun when you beat them after being pushed down over and over again. It is such an amazing feeling of triumph that the FromSoft games have always sought out, and that is the feeling they've managed to replicate. In my opinion, this is probably the best entry point for a new player in the FromSoft genre of games. Now, there's the one boss I'm going to talk about pretty briefly, but I want to give him his own section. Now, the Fire Giant was probably one of my least favorite bosses in the game. When I beat him, there was no sense of I didn't get that dopamine hit of oh, I'm so happy you're dead. I wasn't even happy really. I was just I want to beat the game now because I've been stuck on this boss for so long. And it really sucks that that's one of the last, like, main bosses in the game, you're really going to sour the mood this far into the game. Like, it should be nothing but the best bosses you can make at this point. Yes, skill issue, but it felt like a very weird moment for me. I definitely could have had more, like, stats, but the thing is, I nearly beat him multiple times, but he just always outlasts me by that last, like, 3 greatsword swings. And even when I got the proper stats, air quotes proper, I still barely beat him. It was such a slim victory. It feels like such an unnatural damage gateway, and it becomes a DPS check at one point. Not required, but because you get so bored of fighting him. This is a required boss. You have to beat him to continue the game. You want to throw yourself at him and just get him, do as much damage as quickly as possible to get it over with, because it's not fun. I think I've universally seen the most hatred. Like, I see some stuff about Melania. She's a well-made boss. The Fire Giant just really isn't that fun. He's got, like, a couple moves that he just keeps reusing. He has a really weird roll thing that he does, which, I mean, sure, he has a shield. I guess he's using that to roll, but it is a very annoying move. It does feel just kind of out of place for his design. Why does he have a shield? He's a Fire Giant. And, I don't know, I'm glad that it most of the time didn't just evolve into the stomping that the trolls do, but it just does not. I still am not happy that I beat him. It is just a gateway to the rest of the fun game, and there is no joy, in my opinion, taken from beating that boss. But you said there were bosses you liked, and yes, I'm going to rattle a couple off. There's the Beast Clergyman. There's the Draconic Tree Sentinel. There is the Guardian Watchdog, the 2, where you fight them at the same time. I really loved those. I really like the Erd Tree avatars. Once I beat my first one, I've had very little trouble fighting them ever since. I really like the Knights Cavalry. They're probably one of my favorite designs in the game visually. And those are just the ones off the dome. So, editor's note, I didn't really know where to put this, but I'm just going to put this here, and then we'll go to the wrapping up segment because I thought this was funny enough to keep in. Melania is definitely up there. I didn't actually beat her. That's a funny story. A guy named Lemmy Puncher, spelling on screen. I summoned him because I'm like, this dude's going to die, and he took 3 hits, I think. Maybe he didn't. I don't remember. Didn't die, though. Just punched her to death, and it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. So if you're watching this, Lemmy, keep doing it. You're the next Let Me Solo Her. And then one more editor's note, I actually looked up this name, just Lemmy Puncher, and I actually found a Reddit post about it, so he's out there. You might find him one day, and I hope you do. Overall, my final verdict on Elden Ring is, I'm not using a scoring system, but it's worth it. If you're new to the Souls or the FromSoft genre of games, this is your entry point. It'll probably be really hard to go to the other games after this, but it is really good. I'm having a blast. It is worth it. Just, yes, that if you're asking me if you should get the game, the answer is yes. I love it.